The silence in the grand ballroom was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical, viscous entity that seemed to pour from the vaulted, crystal chandeliered ceilings and pool around the legs of the 400 gilt chairs. It swallowed the gentle prelude of the string quartet, the soft rustle of imported silk and French taffeta, and the distant, efficient clatter from the kitchens where a small army of chefs prepared the sea bass en croûte. It was the silence born of collective, breathless horror, the kind that freezes a scene into a grotesque tableau. And I, Eleanor Margaret Hayes, stood at its epicenter, feeling the delicate ivory satin of my bespoke wedding dress of fabric. I had touched with reverent awe at the fitting the weight of every gaze pressing me into the intricate, sprawling parquet floor that depicted a rising phoenix. My son's words, "That's not a stepfather. That's trash you picked up off the street," didn't echo. They simply existed, a toxic, indelible stain on the perfumed air, suspended among the fragile petals of the 1,000 white gardenias and Casablanca lilies. My former colleagues from the elementary school library, where ID volunteered every Tuesday and Thursday, for a decade looked down at their laps in acute, sweating discomfort, and in the third row, a malignant galaxy of smug satisfaction. The entire Jenkins clan, Tasha, my daughter-in-law, leaned forward in her impossibly tight, blood-red Valentino knockoff, a gash of triumph in the sea of pastels. Her perfectly manicured fingernails like polished obsidian still, pointing derisively at the altar where I stood, my hands suddenly icy in my new husband's warm, reassuringly calloused one. For 15 years, I had been a widow, not just in name, but in spirit. For 15 years, I had worn the invisible, threadbare mantle of poor Ellie, the woman who worked herself to the bone cleaning the sprawling homes in the Hillsborough neighborhoods to supplement my late husband Robert's modest teacher's pension. I was the woman who spent Christmases alone, with a microwave turkey dinner and the ghost of memories. The 4th of July listening to distant fireworks from my lonely porch swing. Loneliness wasn't just an emotion. It was a tenant that had taken up permanent, entitled residence in the spare room of my heart. Its presence announced by the constant, hollow tick of the hallway grandfather clock Robert had lovingly restored. Then came Elias Vance. Eli. We met not in some romantic, serendipitous whirlwind, but in the comforting, mundane reality of the Saturday farmers market on Cedar Street. I was comparing the prices of heirloom tomatoes, the utilitarian task of a woman on a strict, self-imposed budget, every penny accounted for. He was ahead of me at the stall, his simple canvas tote brimming with vibrant, earthy produce scale with dew still on it, carrots with tops like green plumes, a loaf of crusty bread peeking out. When he turned his cartwheel caught mine. A single, perfect, sun-warmed brandywine tomato escaped its paper bag and made a doomed wobbly dash for freedom, rolling under the neighboring stall of honey jars. "Oh, I'm so terribly sorry," I'd said automatically, my lifelong reflex of apology surfacing, though it was arguably his kinematic fault. Without a second thought, I knelt, my left knee, the one that had bothered me since a fall while cleaning a marble staircase 3 years prior, protesting with a sharp twinge. I retrieved the tomato from the dust, cradling it in my palms, brushing it off with the edge of my cardigan before offering it back like a precious artifact. His eyes, a remarkable shade of calm gray-green, like the sea before a storm, held mine. They held intelligence, a touch of wariness, and a deep, inherent kindness. "That's my line," he said, his voice gentle, weathered but warm, like well-used leather. "And you have a bad knee?" "It's just a tomato," I'd shrugged, feeling strangely, profoundly seen. Not as Eleanor the cleaner, or Eleanor, the widow, but as Eleanor, the person who noticed a fallen vegetable and felt compelled to rescue it. That was 6 months ago. 6 months of quiet coffees at the Half Moon Diner, where Mabel the waitress knew our order by heart. 6 months of long, meandering walks in Sycamore Park, where we talked about everything and nothing. The poetry of Mary Oliver, the quiet ache of missing a partner's weight in the bed, the simple, unadulterated joy of discovering a patch of blackberries in late summer. He lived in a small, impeccably neat apartment in a modest brick building, drove a sensible, decade-old Volvo sedan, and spoke of his past work in construction management with a quiet, understated pride. He was a gentleman of modest means, but profound, unshakable character. When he looked at me, I didn't see poor Ellie, the widow or the cleaner. I saw a woman with laughter still in her, with opinions on historical novels, with a capacity for love that hadn't dried up but had merely been waiting. And when he proposed, under the gnarled, ancient oak tree in that very park, with a simple platinum band and tears of genuine, vulnerable joy in his eyes, I said yes, with a feeling that was less like happiness and more like coming up for clean, sweet air after years of drowning in quiet sorrow. I had poured my entire life's savings, every penny scrimped from a lifetime of cleaning jobs, every bit of the careful, modest inheritance from Robert, even the small cash I'd secretly labeled for emergencies, or maybe a cruise someday into this single day. I wanted beauty. I wanted grace. I wanted to make a declaration to the world, and perhaps more importantly, to myself. I am still here. I am not just surviving. I can still love and be loved fiercely, joyfully. The hall, the Orion Room, was a masterpiece of cream and gold. The centerpieces were towering, fragrant sculptures of lilies and orchids and twisting willow, each one costing more than my former monthly grocery bill. It was to be my phoenix moment, rising from the ashes of loneliness on wings of satin and hope. And now, my own flesh and blood, the child I had carried and nurtured and loved with a ferocity that had defined my existence, was reducing it all to smoldering, humiliating ash. I felt a gentle, steadying squeeze on my hand. Eli. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't crumpled. He stood beside me, a portrait of serene, unassailable dignity in his modest, perfectly tailored gray suit. His expression wasn't one of anger, or shame, or even surprise. It was of a deep, almost sorrowful calm, as if he were watching a predictable, sad play unfold. It was that calm, that unshakable core of him, that finally ignited something long dormant within me. The feeling started not as a roaring fire of rage, but as a sudden, piercing clarity, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It was as if the lens through which I had viewed my entire life, a lens smudged with the fingerprints of sacrifice, obligation, and maternal guilt, shattered and fell away. I saw the scene with brutal definition. My son, Darius, swaying slightly on his feet, fueled by expensive champagne and a lifetime of unquestioned entitlement. His $3,000 Ermenagildo Zegnasud was a costume for a role he'd never earned, bought on credit. Tasha beside him, not as a wife or a partner, but as a head curator of cruelty, her family, her gleeful, sycophantic audience. I saw the way her father, Larry, was already chuckling, nudging his brother. I saw her mother, Brenda, filming the whole thing on her rose gold phone, doubtless for later dissection and mockery. The minister, Reverend Miller, a kindly man with a voice like melted butter, who had counseled me patiently through my anxieties about this day, stood frozen at the mahogany lectern, his Bible half closed over our personalized vows. Perhaps Perhaps we should take a momentary pause. He stammered, his face pale. No, I said. The word was quiet, barely more than a breath, but it was absolute. It cut through the suffocating silence like a laser. I let go of Eli's hand. The warmth of his grip lingered on my skin like a promise, an anchor. I took one step forward, then another, my champagne-colored heels clicking a steady, deliberate, unfamiliar rhythm on the phoenix-inlaid floor. I walked past the stunned altar, descended the 3 shallow steps, and stopped halfway down the endless feeling center aisle, directly in the no man's land between my old life and my new, facing my son. You're right, Darius, I said, my voice finding a strength I didn't recognize, carrying in the dead air. Someone does need to tell the truth here. You could have heard a pedal drop. The truth, I continued, the dam inside me bursting, is that for 35 years, I was married to your father. A good, quiet, hard-working man. A man who loved you fiercely. We built a life together, brick by brick, coupon by coupon. We worried about mortgage payments and college funds, and whether the old Honda would make it through another winter. And when he died, too young, of a heart attack that stole him between one breath and the next, he left me with a decent little house, a mountain of medical debt he'd hidden, and a hole in my life so vast and dark I thought it would swallow me whole. My eyes swept over Tasha's smirking family, my gaze hardening. The truth is, I spent the next 15 years in that quiet, echoing house, listening to that silence grow teeth. I called you, Darius. I called every Sunday evening, like clockwork. Sometimes, you answered, hurried, always, with I'm busy, Mom. Tasha and I have plans with the Jacobs, or are we taking the kids to the club? Sometimes you didn't. I left messages. You rarely called back. Darius's smirk had vanished, replaced by a defensive, petulant scowl. The champagne arrogance was fading, revealing the sulky boy beneath. This isn't the time or place for this. It's the only time. The only place, I snapped. The first crack in my newfound composure. A raw edge of 15 years of pain breaking through. When I slipped on the ice 2 winters ago and broke my wrist in 2 places. Who drove me to the emergency room at midnight? My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who is 82 years old and uses a walker. She sat with me for 6 hours. 6 hours. When I needed that knee surgery and my insurance wouldn't cover the full deductible, who did I, with the deepest shame of my life, finally ask? You. And you told me business was tight, the market was down, but you'd see what you could do. I saw the brand new BMW X7 in your driveway the very next week. A car that costs more than I made in 3 years of scrubbing floors. A wave of audible murmurs, disapproving and shocked, rippled through the crowd. I saw heads nodding among my friends, faces hardening with dawning understanding as they looked at my son. Vivian was nodding fiercely, tears of solidarity streaming down her cheeks. The truth, I pressed on, my voice gaining power from the sheer, liberating injustice of it all, is that you have viewed me not as your mother, but as a subsidiary, a low-maintenance, low-return branch of your life that occasionally required a small, grudging deposit of filial guilt, but never, ever any real investment of love, time, or genuine compassion. And now, when I have finally found someone who looks at me and sees a sunrise instead of a sunset, who hears a symphony in my laughter, you have the audacity to stand here, in a room I paid for with the sweat of my brow and the savings of my solitude, and insult him, to call this good, kind, honorable man trash. Tasha couldn't bear the spotlight shifting away. She stood up. A viper on... Oh, spare us the dramatic, self-pitying monologue, Ellie. You're embarrassing yourself. and everyone here. It's pathetically obvious what he is." She gestured with a flick of her wrist, as if shooing a fly, toward Eli, who remained a statue of dignified stillness at the altar. "He's a leech. A clever one." He sniffed out a lonely, vulnerable old woman with a paid-off house and a pathetic, desperate need for attention. "Open your eyes." That was the spark. The cold clarity within me crystallized into something diamond-hard, sharp, and unbreakable. The last vestige of the woman who would apologize for existing evaporated. I turned my back on them. I walked back to Eli, to my place beside him. I took his hand again, feeling its familiar, grounding strength. I looked up at his face. In his eyes, I saw no hurt from their venomous words, no embarrassment, only a profound, aching concern for me. "Are you sure?" I whispered. The words just for him. "You want to be part of this tangled, broken mess." He didn't answer with words. He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles, a gesture so tender, so protectively old-fashioned it made my heart clench with a love so fierce it threatened to buckle my knees. "You, Eleanor," he said, his voice low but carrying to the first few rows, "are the only thing in this room I am absolutely sure of." I turned to face the room, my spine straight as a royal scepter, my chin high. I addressed the venue manager, Mr. Henderson, a tall, elegant man in a severe black suit who had been hovering anxiously by the double oak doors, wringing his hands. "Mr. Henderson, these people," I said, my voice now clear and ringing, gesturing not just to Darius and Tasha, but to the entire blight of the Jenkins family, the sneering cousins, the chuckling uncles, the recording mother-in-law, "are no longer welcome at my wedding. They are trespassing on my joy. Please have them escorted from the premises immediately." What followed was a scene of such grotesque, unraveling spectacle it would be etched into the city's social memory for a decade. Darius spluttered, his face turning a frightening shade of puce. "You can't do this. I'm your son. Your only family. Your blood." "You were," I said, the past tense hanging in the air, final and terrible. A guillotine blade falling between us. Tasha's father, Larry, surged to his feet, his barrel chest puffing out, his face apoplectic. "You'll regret this, you silly woman. You have no idea who you're dealing with. My family is on the Downtown Business Council. We own half the commercial real estate on the South Side." "Then, by all means," I said, my voice dropping to an icy, conversational tone that was somehow more frightening than a shout, "go back to your half. This half is mine." The security team, two large, impeccably professional men in dark suits with discreet earpieces, moved in with smooth efficiency. There was no physical struggle, just a chaotic, humiliating retreat. Tasha shrieked about her designer dress being touched by gorillas. Her mother wailed about the insult and the wasted gift envelope. As they were shepherded, a squawking, disheveled flock of outrage, toward the doors, their perfumes leaving a bitter trail, Darius turned at the threshold. He shrugged off the security guard's light touch on his elbow, his eyes filled with a hatred I never, in my darkest nightmares, thought I'd see directed at me, locked onto mine. He took 2 steps back into the room, and in a low, venomous hiss that slithered across the silent space, he said, "If you do this, you will never see Miles or Chloe again. I will make sure of it. I swear to God, Mother, you are dead to me. You chose your trash. Now live in it." The doors swung shut with a heavy, definitive thud that resonated in the hollow of my chest. The silence returned. But it was different now. It was a stunned, empathetic, supportive silence, thick with unspoken emotion. And then, one person began to clap. A slow, deliberate, solid clap. It was Fifine. She was on her feet, her eyes blazing with pride through her tears. Then Robert's old college friend, Ben, stood and joined. Then Mabel from the diner, who I'd invited on a whim, and another, and another. Soon, the entire room, the true guests, the people who knew the weight of my loneliness and the miracle of this day, were on their feet, applauding. Not a wedding, but a reclamation, a coronation of self-respect. Tears streamed down my face freely now, washing away the last of the humiliation, leaving something raw, powerful, and clean underneath. Reverend Milo, wiping his own eyes with a handkerchief, cleared his throat, a new, firm resolve in his posture. "Well," he said, a small, amazed smile on his face. "Shall we conclude the ceremony for these two brave souls?" We did. The vows we exchanged mere minutes later were the most meaningful, anchored words I have ever spoken or heard. They were not just promises of love and fidelity, but of mutual salvation, of being a harbor in each other's storms. When he kissed me, the applause erupted again, a thunderous, joyous, cathartic roar that shook the crystal in the chandeliers. The reception began, the mood transforming into a defiant, celebratory feast. The band played with more soul. People danced with abandoned joy. But a cold, sharp shadow lingered in the deepest chamber of my heart. The threat to my grandchildren, Miles with his father's serious eyes, and Chloe with my laugh. As we danced our first dance to it last, Eli held me close, his hand a steadying warmth on the small of my back. "There is something I must tell you, my love," he murmured into my hair, his voice a low vibration against my temple. "And it cannot wait for the sunset or the honeymoon. It must be now." He led me, with a whispered word, to Vivian, to a small, book-lined private anteroom, off the main ballroom, a gentleman's study rarely used. Vivian, ever loyal, followed, shutting the heavy oak door on the vibrant sounds of music and laughter, leaving us in a pool of quiet, lamplit intimacy. Eli guided me to a worn, buttery leather sofa and, to my astonishment, knelt before me on the Persian rug, taking both my hands in his. The gesture was one of supplication, of profound respect. "Ellie," he began, his gray-green eyes searching mine, "the life I have presented to you these past 6 months, the apartment, the car, the simple, honest clothes. It is a life I consciously and deliberately chose, but it is not the full truth of my circumstances. I have withheld a significant part of myself, not out of deceit, but out of a desperate need for authenticity. I felt a flutter of anxiety, a moth of doubt beating wings in my stomach. Had I been a fool twice over? "Eli, you're scaring me." "What is it?" He took a deep, steadying breath, as if preparing to lift a great weight. "My work in construction management, I was economical with the truth. I didn't manage projects. I conceived them. I funded them. I built the company. Several companies, in fact." He paused, letting the words settle. "After my wife, my beloved Leticia, died 8 years of pancreatic cancer. Swift and brutal, I found that my wealth, the empire I'd built, had become not a tool, but a barrier. It was a magnet for the worst kind of people sycophants, gold diggers, distant relatives with memorized sob stories and open palms. I felt like a bank, not a man. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to strip away every extrinsic lure and find someone who would love the man I was at my core, the boy who'd started with a hammer and a dream, not the titan with a spreadsheet." His eyes held mine, pleading for understanding, for absolution. Ellie, I am the founder and majority owner of Vance Global Enterprises. My personal net worth, as of this morning's market close, is approximately $2.3 billion. The numbers were abstract, incomprehensible. Billion. The word had no purchase in the reality of my life, a life measured in coupons and careful miles on the odometer. The room seemed to tilt, the rows of leather-bound books blurring. Vivian gasped behind me, sinking into a wingback chair with a soft hump. VGE, the sustainable infrastructure giant. The one that built the new cross-city monorail and the tidal energy platforms. Elias. My God. You're that. Elias. Vance, the philanthropist. The one who gave the anonymous $50 million to the children's hospital. He gave a single, slight, almost apologetic nod, his eyes never leaving mine. I am the anonymous donor to the city's free dental clinic for low-income seniors. That was one of my foundations. The complete rebuild of the Southside Community Center after the flood. My team designed it. My capital built it, pro bono. My mind was a whirlwind, a carousel of impossible images. A billionaire. He lived like a retired, thoughtful foreman, but he was a king in worn corduroys, an emperor in disguise. The man who happily ate my meatloaf, who fixed my leaky faucet with his own hands, who talked about the cost of fish at the market, commanded boardrooms, moved markets, shaped city skylines. Why was all I could whisper, the words scraping from a dry throat. Why the performance? Why me? It was no performance, he said fiercely, squeezing my hands. The man who loves you, who cherishes the sound of your laugh, who thinks you are the strongest, most beautifully resilient woman he has ever known. That man is real. The money, the companies, the stock tickers, that is just circumstance. A byproduct of a mind that sees patterns and a will that doesn't quit. And I chose you, Ellie, because when you believed, with every fiber of your being, that I had nothing but my social security check and a simple affection to offer, you gave me everything. Your time, your unwavering attention, your homemade chicken soup when I had a cold, your laughter in the park, the way you listen with your whole soul. You are the rarest of treasures in a world of paste and polish. A person of pure, unadulterated heart. The revelation was staggering, a seismic shift in the landscape of my understanding. The man I'd defended as a humble pauper was one of the most powerful, wealthy men on the coast. The irony was so vast, so cosmically humorous, it bordered on tragedy. Darius's insult wasn't just cruel, it was historically, epically misguided. Your son's behavior tonight, Eli continued, his voice softening but losing none of its intensity, was the final, ugly, necessary test. I needed to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, with evidence as clear as this diamond on your finger, that your loyalty, your love, was to me, Elias. The man, not to the ghost of your late husband, not to the idea of a companion, and certainly not to the phantom possibility of what my wealth could do for your struggling family. I watched you choose us. You stood in the line of fire for a man you believed had nothing to offer you but his heart. And I have never, in all my years of boardroom battles and financial triumphs, been more proud or more certain of anything in my life. He then revealed layers upon layers of quiet, behind-the-scenes orchestration. He had, through his formidable lawyer Marcus King, quietly traced and paid off the entire debt. Darius had held over me $5,000 for my roof repair 3 months prior. He had a discreet but formidable intelligence team that had been monitoring Darius's rapidly crumbling financial situation. His in deep, dangerous trouble, Ellie, Eli said, his face grave. Not just significant debt to legitimate institutions, which is bad enough, but also to less savory characters. The kind who don't send polite letters from a collections agency. The maternal panic, a beast that never truly sleeps, surged again, now horribly tangled with this new, surreal reality. My son was in physical danger. We have to help him. Eli, we can't just... We will, Eli interrupted, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. But not with a blank check thrown into a burning building. That would only confirm his worst, most superficial instincts that money solves everything, that connections trump character. We help by giving him the tools, the legal protection, and the very hard, very real opportunity to save himself. That is the only help that will last. The only help that might, in time, rebuild a man. The weeks that followed our wedding were a dizzying journey between two diametrically opposed worlds. One world was of almost unimaginable, serene luxury. A private jet, not gaudy, but serene and efficient to Paris for a weekend because Eli remembered I'd never seen the same. Quiet fittings in a mirrored atelier for couture dressage I never dreamed of wearing, chosen for their elegance, not their labels. The closing on a breathtaking, modern cliffside home of glass and reclaimed timber that seemed to hang over the Pacific, where the sound of the waves was a constant, soothing breath. Eli was determined to share his world with me, not as a curious spectator, but as a partner, a confidant. He involved me in his charitable foundation boards, and I, drawing from the well of my own isolation, found my true passion and voice in advocating for socially isolated seniors, founding the Eleanor Initiative with an initial endowment that made my head spin. The other world was the grim, unraveling reality of Darius's total collapse. Tasha left him 10 days after the wedding, taking the children and every item of visible value from the house. His McMansion, a monument to leverage, was foreclosed upon. The BMW was repossessed from the driveway. The creditors, both the legitimate banks and the ominous, shadowy figures, were circling like sharks in chummed water. Eli's lawyer, the formidable, silver-haired Marcus King, intervened not with payments, but with legal and strategic muscle. He forced the legitimate creditors into structured, fair negotiations and, using contacts and strategies I didn't want to understand, erected an impenetrable legal shield between Darius and the more dangerous players. Darius was not bailed out. He was forced kicking and screaming into personal bankruptcy. He was stripped of every asset, every talisman of his false status. He was left with nothing but the clothes he stood in and a crushing mountain of shame. After a month of this painful descent, knowing he was at his nadir, I went to see him. Eli's head of security, a calm man named Leo, drove me in a nondescript car to a dingy, weekly rate motel on the industrial side of the city, the kind with flickering neon and perpetually damp asphalt. The sight of my son emerging from room 114, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing a stained polo shirt and yesterday's despair, was a physical wound, a sword thrust through the portrait of the proud little boy I held in my heart. "Mom," he whispered, the word tentative, the anger and arrogance completely gone, replaced by a hollow, bewildered shame. He looked like a shipwreck victim washed ashore. I didn't cross the threshold. The smell of stale cigarettes and hopelessness wafted out. "I have 2 things to say, Darius. Then I'm leaving. First, Elias is not a retired construction manager. He is Elias Vance, founder and principal owner of Vance Global Enterprises. His net worth is measured in billions, multiple billions. The transformation on Darius's face was a slow-motion masterpiece of tragic, devastating realization. The confusion first, then the dawning, staggering horror, then the utter, complete comprehension of the catastrophic scale of his error. He hadn't just insulted a humble suitor. He had publicly vilified a modern-day Midas, a man of such immense power and influence that he could have lifted Darius's entire world with a phone call. And he had thrown that potential away for a cheap laugh and a moment of cruel superiority. The loss was so total, it was almost abstract. He swayed on his feet, grasping the doorframe. "The second," I said, my voice cold and clear, the voice of a judge passing a severe but just sentence, "is that he wanted to give you the money. All of it, to wipe your slate clean, to make your problems disappear." I was the one who told him no. I forbade it. Why? The word was a broken thing, ripped from a place of utter desolation, because you need to learn what your father and I learned through decades of honest work, what Eli learned through devastating personal loss. That true value has nothing to do with price tags. Self-worth cannot be purchased. Respect cannot be leased. You need to rebuild your own value, brick by painful brick, with your own blistered hands. You need to stare into the abyss of your own making and find out what, if anything, is left of the boy I raised who knew right from wrong. I handed him 2 items: Marcus King's pristine business card and a plain white envelope. The card is for Marcus King. He is the best legal and strategic mind on this coast. He will guide you for no fee through the bankruptcy process and help you find legitimate, honest work. The envelope contains a basic prepaid phone, activated, and the keys and address of a clean, furnished, 1-bedroom apartment in a safe, working-class neighborhood. I've paid the first 3 months' rent. It is in my name. This is not a gift of money. It is a gift of a starting line. The race, and whether you run it, is entirely up to you. I turned to leave, the gravel crunching under my shoes. "Mom, wait," he called out, his voice cracking. I paused, but didn't turn. Does he hate me? I looked over my shoulder, seeing the ghost of my child in the eyes of this broken man. Eli doesn't hate you, Derai. He pities you, and he is willing, for my sake, and for the man you might one day become, to offer you a chance to earn back something infinitely more valuable than his money. Your own self-respect. Don't waste it. The road back was long, arduous, and punctuated by setbacks. Didas hit true, unvarnished rock bottom. He took the apartment. He ignored Marcus's initial offers of a cushy, make-work desk job at a distant subsidiary. Through his own humbled efforts, he got hired as a manual laborer for a municipal landscaping crew. He came home exhausted, with real dirt ground into his hands and a new, unfamiliar humility in his eyes. He attended the financial literacy workshops offered by the Eleanor Initiative, sitting in the back, not saying a word. Meanwhile, I began the delicate, painful process of re-establishing contact with Miles and Chloe. Using a combination of gentle, persistent persuasion, the expert counsel of a child psychologist Eli retained, and the unspoken, formidable influence of the Vance name, I navigated Tasha's bitter resistance. The first visit, in a neutral playroom, was supervised, tearful, and fragile. Slowly, visit by visit, trust was rebuilt. I was just Grandma Ellie again, who brought cookies and knew all the words to the silly songs months past. One afternoon, as I was reviewing grant proposals for my initiative, a letter arrived. It was addressed in a shaky, unpracticed hand. It was from Darius, written on cheap, lined notebook paper, the kind he'd used in school. It was several pages long, a raw, unflinching confession of his deep-seated insecurity next to Tasha's family. His jealousy of the time and happiness I'd found with Eli. His enslavement to a lifestyle he couldn't afford and didn't even enjoy. His shame over the $5,000. His horror at his own behavior at the wedding. It ended not with a request for anything, but with a simple, stark statement. I am learning, every day, what it means to be a man. I hope, with every fiber left in me, that one day I'll deserve to be called your son again. We began to talk, awkwardly, painfully, then with growing, cautious honesty. Short phone calls that grew longer. He started, voluntarily, speaking to at-risk youth groups at the community center. My foundation supported, telling his story with brutal honesty, a cautionary tale about vanity, debt, and losing what matters. A year to the day after the wedding, that almost wasn't Eli and I, hosted a small, private dinner at our cliffside home. The guests were Vivian and her husband, Marcus King, and Daria. Miles and Chloe, now chattering and bright, played with a puzzle in the adjoining sunroom. The conversation over dinner was quiet, sometimes strained, but undeniably real. Darius spoke of his work, of a promotion to crew foreman, of budgeting to save for a used, reliable car. After dessert, Darius asked to speak with Eli alone on the vast ocean view terrace. I watched through the floor-to-ceiling glass, my heart a trapped bird in my chest. I saw my son, now lean and weathered from honest outdoor work, his posture less arrogant, more grounded, extend his hand. I saw my husband, my billionaire, in soft chinos and a worn sweater, take it. And then, to my shock, I saw Eli pull Darius into a brief, firm, backlapping embrace. They spoke for a long time, their heads close together, silhouetted against the vast, star-dusted panorama of the night sea. Later, wrapped in the quiet luxury of our bedroom, the rhythmic crash of the waves a lullaby below, I lay in Eli's arms. "What did he say to you?" I whispered into the darkness. He held me closer, his breath warm against my hair. He thanked me, not for the apartment, or the legal help, or the money he now knows I could have given with a signature. He thanked me for loving his mother enough to protect her, even from her own child, for having the strength he lacked. And then, Eli's voice held a note of profound emotion. He asked my permission to start calling me Eli instead of Mr. Vance. A small, moved smile touched his lips, felt rather than seen. I told him he'd always had my permission. He just had to earn his own. I looked out at the infinite black velvet ocean, streaked with a path of liquid moonlight, thinking of the tumultuous, terrifying voyage from that humiliated, trembling woman at the altar to this moment of hard-won, deeply cherished peace. The journey had cost me dearly. It had required me to surgically sever a toxic, life-draining tie to my past to fully embrace a profound, luminous future. I had learned, in the most painful way imaginable, that family is not just the blood you share, but the people who stand unwavering with you in the silent, wreck-strewn aftermath of the storm, helping you rebuild something stronger and more beautiful. And I had discovered that the greatest fortune of all is not measured in bank vaults or stock portfolios, but in the quiet, earth-shattering courage to defend your own heart's truth, and in the boundless, miraculously forgiving capacity of love to heal, to transform, and to make whole even the deepest, most painfully fractured things.